basically every video on Twitter now.
We are streaming, so keep going ahead. It doesn't matter. No one's gonna. Sorry, it took forever to get all that typed in, and then I was like, and then start streaming, and then you started talking.
Okay. Well, either way, welcome back everyone to Talkback Radio, your podcast source for Pac-12 football news, the home of the Beta Rank College Football Statistical Model. This is the Pac-4 podcast. My apologies. But before we start recording, we're still getting used to simulcast, right? I think we got our sound right. I got the ring light and everything. I think we're in better shape than we've been ever. I feel great, Rob. I just worked out.
Just in time.
Yeah, just in time. I'm scrolling Twitter, right? And every video that I'm seeing right now is basically a reproduction of an Office or I Think You Should Leave video where they have, they basically superimpose your team's mascot over the teams that are rejected by one conference or the other. So it's really fascinating. A lot to talk today. We are going to do our Oregon and our Oregon State preview. Like I want to continue to focus on the actual teams because these are two fascinating teams in the conference that I think will be really interesting as we move forward into the 2023 and in the 2024 season. Joined by Rob Barron as always. Unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your school and what you want out of college football. Big news, obviously dropping yesterday. I was on a plane and driving all around California at the time, so I look at my phone and lo and behold, you have, of course, Oregon and Washington bolting to the Big Ten. And then you have, of course, the corner schools, Arizona State, Utah, and Colorado, which had already done so, moving to the Big 12, which leaves, unfortunately, like one of my favorite fan bases in the Washington State Cougars. You have Oregon State and, of course, Cal and Stanford without a home. Cal, of course, spent its like $7 million to make sure that the football stadium that it put on its fault line was in good shape, only to not be part of a conference. And here we are, Rob. How are you?
I mean, wow. I mean, it's definitely been... I've had better days. I mean, even though, the alma mater did find a landing spot, like I'm a huge Pac-12 fan. My sister is an Oregon State alum. She wanted to get a dog and name it Mike Riley so that she could talk to Mike Riley during the games. So it is like deeply sad to be sitting here having, lost the Pac-12 to what is essentially like, for lack of a better way to put it, Fox and ESPN just didn't want anybody to sign a contract with Apple. Just such a stupid reason to lose a conference.
Yeah, I was, once Colorado went, you kind of assumed that the other shoe would drop, and I was curious on what the terms would be and that kind of stuff. So it kind of seemed like it was pretty much etched in stone that Arizona State was going to leave. Although Michael, find a friend like that's as loyal to you as Michael Crow is to the Pac-12. My goodness, that guy just was held on to the bitter end, man. He's like, hey, we can, if we all still wish it, we can make the best yearbook ever still, right, everybody? And then, at the very end, he's still kicking and screaming as he's going over to the Pac-12. It's Michael Crow, right? That's
he's the
Arizona
ASU president.
All right, yeah, I just want to make sure. I always mix him up with the Oregon State president because he was also like fiercely and inappropriately loyal to Michael Scott. so I always kind of mix them up. So I thought that, that was kind of interesting. But really what jumped out was, and this a little bit more in depth than I do, but there was news that the Pac-12 was gonna stay together, the Pac-11 or whatever it was, and then all of a sudden you have the Big Ten coming in and offering Oregon and Washington kind of a life raft and $30 million each for them to jump with like escalating money as the years go by. I did think it was interesting when you finally had there's. I want to talk about that, but I think let me back up for a moment because there was two just things that made me like die laughing when it came to the actual Pac-12 Apple contract. The first was we've been waiting for this for like a year and a half, right? And then Apple drops the contract and they say, but this is going to expire in 24 hours. Like it's a message from Mission Impossible, which I thought was just so stupid. Like, oh, okay. Yeah. You know who also told me that? The used car salesman that said that I can only get this offer if I sign today.
Right.
And then you leave and then they call you back after like 3 weeks and say, okay, remember that offer? We'll give it back to you. So there's that. And then the second portion that I thought was fascinating was, it was like 20-ish, low $20 million per school was the ended up being the contract for the Pac-12 that of course wasn't signed. But the thing that just jumped out for me was there was like these kind of Avon type incentives. Like, now if you tell a friend and they recruit a friend and they recruit a friend, then you're going to make $10 million. And it just kind of seemed when you have a bunch of schools who kind of want stability, right? You want to be able to at least project a general baseline. And I guess maybe the baseline was 20 million and then everything else was gravy if you're able to do it. But it just seemed like, look, I appreciate incentives and sales incentives that are incredibly important. But at the end of the day, when you took a look at what the Pac-12 had and just them having to grind almost like a band that's trying to make it, and then they have to drive ticket sales to the venue. Yeah. It's just, I'm like, what are we? And like, are we right out of college and just trying to get a first job? Like, I don't understand what this is. And those two things I think ended up being a problem.
Yeah. I mean, so, full disclosure, I work at a company that buys video advertising. Like, so I am literally in conversations about buying streaming advertising and buying linear advertising every single day. So I know a little bit about how the industry works. And the way Apple has positioned that deal makes sense if you're a streamer, right? Like, you don't have some tax that you can go apply in cable fees to like a bunch of subscribers, whether they're going to watch it or not, right?
That's true, yeah.
And so they have to have incentive. Like, I mean, if they give you some flat number, you as a partner are not incentivized to go like make sure you get enough signups to make it economically work, right? And so like you saw this with the MLS deal, and look, the MLS has struggled until they got Messi on to really hit their numbers to bring in some of the extra money. But I do think, I think, look, I mean, these are the kind of deals that are coming. Like the ability, like I try to point this out because, in the industry itself, right? Like, streaming is here. You're already looking at 63% of cable subscribers are over 68 years old, right? Like, ESPN is getting shopped by Disney looking for an equity partner. It's not the moneymaker anymore. It's a potential financial liability with all the outlays that they have. And the massive decline in cable subscriptions. I mean, by 2027, they're looking at potentially losing 35% more of cable subscriptions of what already is a much smaller number. And on their own, right, like people have projected out that if you were going to try to make ESPN profitable as a streaming service, it would be $50 a month on its own. So it's like, I do like when people are running around right now, and I think if you're listening, like if you see a lot of like college football writers and stuff, like almost everyone that they have an industry source in is like some white-haired linear dude, right? Who's like, streaming, what is that, right? Like, no one wants to be on streaming. And I don't think, like, look, I mean, it's clear that yes, streaming isn't there right now in terms of eyeballs. But I think this really could have worked for the Pac-12. I talked to someone this morning who would know. And I mean, literally talks with Oregon and Washington in the Big Ten. That reporting that you saw by The Athletic and by Yahoo that reported that talks had kind of fallen apart overnight, that was true. Everyone was coming in to sign into that grant of rights meeting. And then at the 11th hour, the Big Ten comes back. And the fact that Oregon and Washington take the $30 million tells you where the holdup was. It wasn't on their side. The holdup was on the Big Ten president's side, right? Like, the fact that they would take an offer that low tells you they would have taken that offer no matter what, right? Like, the holdup came from Fox needed to get the Big Ten presidents involved. And this really comes, I mean, and there's a great article in the New York Times, which if you go to my Twitter feed, I gifted out that anyone can read, that is about the economics of like, because Bob Iger, the Disney chairman, went on CNBC and said like, hey, we're probably looking for an equity partner for ESPN. And people were like, wait, what? It sent shockwaves through the industry. And they're looking for a partner that is probably either can help them figure out streaming, or a partner that is a sports league that can help them cap costs in the future. And But they haven't. I mean, like the amazing thing with streaming is like if you think of like all that IP that Disney just bought, the fact that they have their own IP and Disney and they just bought out Fox of Hulu and you throw ESPN on there, they couldn't make that bundle work economically, right? Like,
which is wild.
I know.
There's so much stuff there.
So like people are still struggling. I mean, it's funny to.
But like if I can just, it was expensive. I mean, I looked at that too because I said, oh, that's interesting. You know, I can get Disney, and I looked at the price and I'm just going, this isn't like I'll just bum off of somebody else for a bit. Like,
but I mean, the thing of like, I mean, I had somebody come back and they're like, yeah, but we'll be with you. Like, cause like, I was like, the Apple deal's not quite as bad as you think. Like nearly all of these deals are going to have some streaming component in them in the future. Like, congratulations, Big Ten, enjoy some Peacock games, right? Like all your basketball's going on Peacock practically. Like that Big 12 deal has a ton of streaming on it. With ESPN Plus, like that's going to be the Big 12 network is basically ESPN Plus. But like people were saying like, oh, we'll be on ESPN and it'll be super accessible. I'm like, guys, like that's not the future. Like within the next couple of years, that is not going to be the future. You can't go back. Like ESPN has been paying and Fox has been paying for these massive rights deals that they've been making by upping subscriber fees. So even as they're losing cable subscribers, they're upping the rights fees that they're charging the cable companies and then passing them on to consumers. But that makes their problem worse because like the more those go up, the more cable subscribers you lose too. So they put themselves in like a bit of an adverse selection, but like within the industry, people believe that they actually overpaid on the Big Ten and the SEC and the Big 12 to keep Apple and Amazon out this round. And this feels like this time around, like you remember the old Pac 16 and NBC was going to come in and be the partner for that. And Fox and ESPN were like, no, not happening. We're not letting NBC get involved in this. And they offered a bunch of money to teams to stay. They offered Texas the Longhorn Network to lure them back right from that just in order to kill it. Like these guys work together on this. And so like out of this, everybody basically gets some Pac-12 schools for West Coast Prime at about $30 million a year. Right? Like, I mean, like everybody, I mean, I'm sorry. Like, I know that I know the story that you are getting from the folks in the media is like the Big Ten did this and blah, blah, blah. But even like ESPN's like Big Ten reporter, like quoted one of the Big Ten presidents saying is like, the network runs the conference yesterday. And I was like, duh.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want like one question. I'm in the middle, so I just got back into Twitter and like right when I jump on, like 17,000 people have seen this tweet I sent out about USC. I'm actually
the thing that we literally said about USC since like 2014 about like if the Pac-12 wants to get things going, like it really does need USC to pick it up.
Yeah. So if you're listening to this, so just some clarification, right? Because somebody basically said that USC was right to leave the Pac-12 because they didn't treat them right and they held down the conference and stuff. Like I grew up in Southern California. I got interested in college football literally from the Orange Bowls where USC like dangled Oklahoma and Iowa and tore their insect limbs off one by one. I mean, like those teams got me interested in college football. I want USC to be successful, and watching them for 10 years just really destroy any national, right? Like that's why you had Stanford. That's why you had Oregon. They were filling the gap that USC left behind. So the argument I was making is not that USC shouldn't have been like, it isn't a premier program. It is. But at the same time, you have a lot of USC fans, doing that meme of Wolverine, looking at the picture, and the picture's Pete Carroll. Like they were looking at that picture for 10 years while Clay Helton and a Sark that wasn't quite sober yet, and he is now, which I'm really excited about. But he wasn't at that time, and they kind of knew that. Like they didn't do their due diligence on that. That harmed the program. So for 10 years, you had a premier program that is a national power, that it does have national relevance.
It was the only blue blood in the conference.
Yes. And they were in the top 25, and USC fans are like pointing to, hey, we were in the top 25. I'm like, dude, you're USC. Like I remember what you can be, and you remember what you can be. So the bummer is, they stopped the conference from expanding, and then they bolted the Big Ten. We've already talked about that. That was really shiesty. And the bummer is they finally have their act together, right? I think Lincoln Riley, look, this program's awesome. I really, really enjoy watching Caleb Williams play football. It is a privilege to watch that. Lincoln Riley is a coach that is going to put them in the right spot. He's ruthless, right? He's throwing money at people like that are part of other teams, and he doesn't care.
Right.
And that's kind of unfortunately where college football is right now. But he's doing it right. Like he's willing to get in that mud.
I mean, they picked Arizona's pocket. I mean, they took Arizona's three of Arizona's very best players.
Absolutely. Yeah. They just pull them away. And that's what you need to do to win a national title. And now they're going to another conference. That's the bummer. Whereas I wanted that for 10 years and I finally got it. You know what, I'm going to get it for 2 years before they're gone. And that's a bummer. That's a bummer.
Well, you're in a different, I mean, like the Pac-12 is like, look, it's not the SEC. It's not like, I mean, the SEC, Alabama could go hire, you know, like what was the Shula kid that sucked. Like you can make a bad hire at Alabama and it's fine because like Florida, someone else will pick up the slack, right? Like that's the way like the SEC is like a Gorgon, right? Like there are just so many heads on this monster, you know, like the Big Ten's a bit different. I mean, they do have some really big fan bases in there for sure. And some of those have not had some great years of late, but like Ohio State, I mean, and you've been to Columbus, but like I cannot overstate how big of a fan base Ohio State is. Like we could quit the Pac-12 podcast today and start an Ohio State podcast, exclusively that, and we would be easily the least popular Ohio State podcast, and we would still probably generate like 6 times as the number of listeners. Like it is just it is bananas how big Ohio State is, and Ohio State almost never has off days. Right. Like, I mean, they don't like they are consistently really good. It is a hard job to screw up. They raise millions. I mean, they have like a $200 million rainy day fund. So like but the Pac-12 is a bit more like that Big Ten where you need your moneymaker to just show up to work every day. Yeah. And man, the Trojans just were a total, I mean, like hiring the dumbest people as AD.
Swan was their athletic
director. I mean, the real problem, to be clear, the real problem was not the coaching hires. The coaching hires were a function of the idiot athletic director hires that they made, which were like, hey man, this guy played football. Let's make him the athletic director. Surely that will work, right? Like, I mean, people who had across their careers, like had no experience hiring. They're like, USC's like, yeah, man, that's the guy.
Yeah. It's crazy. You know, like we can dwell on it for a while. I guess one of the questions I had for you was, you know, I feel really bad for Washington State and Oregon State because those teams tried. I mean, look, the Wayne Tinkle contract was like just, we talk about bad contracts and dumb ADs, but on the football side, right? We're a football podcast. Jonathan Smith, great, you know, and even like, look, even Gary Anderson before that at the time looked like a good hire before we realized. Yeah. And then of course what they were able to do before that, like those Oregon State games with the Rogers brothers, like they've had a really good string of good hires. All they've done is be really solid and punched above their weight for the most part, outside of the crater that was the Gary Anderson. And if you look at Washington State, you know, Mike Leach, take all the off-field stuff about Rolovich aside, I do think that was a creative, inspired hire. Like it would have been interesting to see what that looked like years, right? Because he had the run and shoot, and it's just interesting and different. And of course, what they were able to do now with Dickert, those are good hires. I think they've really tried. And on the basketball side with Washington State, they've tried some stuff too that I think is interesting with their most recent hire from San Francisco. They don't have a home right now, and then you have Cal and Stanford.
Right. I mean, like, as we talked about on the last podcast, like literally going door to door. Have you heard the good news about Cal football?
So, I mean, what do you think the most likely scenario is for them?
So look, they're in a tough, I mean, clearly they're in a tough spot, right? Like no one is gonna ESP. I mean, so funny, like there was a great, like, so they remember last year when the SEC was debating going to 9 games, they went to ESPN and they said, we'll go to 9 games. And ESPN said, we're not going to pay you any additional dollars for that, because ESPN doesn't have the money to go give them that. So ESPN does not have the money, I think, right now to go overpay. And I'm not saying this in a harsh. I'm not trying to be a jerk. I'm just in a pure business sense. ESPN does not have the money right now to go give Oregon State and Washington State and Cal and Stanford an above market valuation. They don't have cash for it. So they're not going to get that $30 million Big 12 deal. I would also say it is unlikely that the Big 12 looks at them as long-term partners, as somebody they could bring in on prorated deals where they're going to be able to make it up. I mean, I got to be honest. I'm not sure Oregon and Washington are ever revenue plus for the Big 10. I'm not sure they are. I think there's a pretty big gap between the valuation. I think they actually end up bringing the average valuation down by the time we get to the next contract. That's it. It's hard to see. I mean, like, so here's one possible. I mean, there's two possibilities. Really there are. I mean, maybe Stanford could go independent or something crazy like that. I don't know who's going to buy that contract, but sure. Stanford goes barnstorming. Like you do not want to be coming up with an independent schedule a year out. Good luck. But
yeah.
Trying to find enough open dates to make that work. I just think for Stanford or for those teams is like your options are you join the Mountain West, right? Like the Mountain West takes you in. The other one is, and look, the Mountain West can, if enough teams say we want out, it can dissolve. Right. And so they could invite in teams from the Mountain West. I know people are saying like, oh, you can't get past the grant of rights.
Like a 30 million.
Yeah. But you get enough teams to vote for it. You get a super majority and they can basically vote to end the conference. And then join, the Pac-12, and then they would just join on to that whatever that's going to be. Your options there are probably get you slightly better money if you can convince a majority of teams in the Mountain West to jam out of the Mountain West and come to you. You would, and I grew up in Wyoming, but you would probably want to cut somebody like Wyoming, which is like the smallest population of any state in the country, right? You probably are looking to, at that point, like cut the smallest earners in the Mountain West out, but you're looking at like $8-9 million a year, maybe. So with the, but like you want to keep the number that you're like, it's tough because like you want to keep the number that you would bring along really small. As small as you could get it and still get enough votes to perhaps dissolve the Mountain West. I guess like three, and I haven't had a chance to read this. Canzano just reported out that there is a bunch of money within the conference that those four schools are sitting on, like $400 million, of which they can, I think, mostly use for themselves. I have no idea how any of that's going to work out.
It would be like, I think we've talked about this before, and I forget where else I heard it, but if you're Cal, do you want to play football? Like the Wilcox hire he's a real football coach, so I'm not
right.
Trying, but it just seems like the rest of the administration is like, you take it or leave it. And it would be really funny to me if UCLA is still paying Cal to not play football. Right, it's almost like the equivalent of a coach. Like if you're
UCLA, you're like desperately like nudging Cal of like, are you sure you want to do this? Right, like, but it is. Look, the West Coast got hit by demographic changes first too, right? Like California became majority minority a long time ago before the rest of the U.S. The rest of the U.S. is on that track. Like the rest of the U.S., like I think in U.S. elementary schools we're already there. Right. There's just lower engagement with football than there has been. Like, high school player numbers are down nationally. Now there are a couple places where they're up, but like nationally overall, they're down. Like I'm not saying like, I just say this is like, I think in the long run trend, like I think college, like some of the effects that we've seen in the West Coast of like disengagement with football, which like some of which is like USC sucking. But some of that disengagement is going to come to the rest of the country eventually too. But like if you're Cal, like, you have your student body. UCLA student body isn't terribly engaged.
No. Oh God, no.
And USC, like USC has some engagement amongst their students. I mean, like, I think people also do actually care about going to USC for football too. But if you're going to UCLA, you're going to UCLA for the academics. Like, you're going to Cal, you're going for the academics. You're going for Stanford, you're definitely going for the academics, right? Like, and I think there's just been a big transition as the populations that are less engaged with football first and foremost. And I don't say this like this isn't like a racial thing or anything like that. I just think kids are growing up with less interest in football and maybe team sports in general, right, than we used to. Like, I look at my kid, like, we don't play a lot of team sports the way I did when I was growing up, and like neither do his buddies. So I just think there's like, I think things are like, I think those changes happened in California a while ago and now they're coming to the rest of the place, but they're not like, that's not going to change for Cal, right? Like, you're not going to start bringing in a bunch of like students that grew up on football. It's not coming.
Yeah. It just seems like that's a school where I think if you really gave the administration a choice and it came down to like, right, the money is so big that they just, I mean, you kind of have to say yes, but if the money's not that big, like, why bother?
Their debt is huge. I mean, that's the, like, I mean, like, main campus had to help them out. Like, when I was joking, like, I mean, and I kid you not, like, some like Oregon's president said that, like, because they're taking $30 million and it's going to increase by $1 million every year. So they'll be at like $36 million on the last year of the Big Ten contract. They're like, so he said, but on average over our first 10 years in the Big Ten, it'll be 50 million. And I was like, oh, I can do that math. That's easy. So I was like, so what's he projecting that they're going to make every year in the next Big Ten contract? And right now they're like right around 60 million. He's projecting 95 million for the next Big Ten contract, which would be like a $30 million. And I was like, that's nuts. Like, they really have no idea what's happening in TV and in what we would call video as we move to streaming for this at all. And like, they're going to be able to, like, the Big Ten told them they could borrow against future earnings. And I was like, are they using that 95 million as their baseline? Cause like, holy moly, these guys are going to go bust. But Cal's there already. Cal is like up to their ears in debt. Main campus had to come in. They've had to bring in, like several, try to be as creative as they could potentially be with advertising partners, to, bring them in. That I think is sort of it's a tough, I just think they're in a real tough spot, right? Like, I mean, like, they can't fold the football program. They'll never pay off the debt. And main campus doesn't want to take all that on. Like, they've got to try to be somewhat revenue positive. Otherwise, like, the athletic department's got to declare bankruptcy.
Do it. Just do it. I mean, like, why not? Let's just do it. If Florida State is looking to Goldman Sachs or whatever for private equity, I mean, like, this is just so ridiculous.
Florida State's in a spot. That's not our it's not our deal to talk about, but like, Florida State's in a very like rent controlled contract with ESPN, and then the only conference they can go to is the SEC, which is owned by ESPN. Why would ESPN do that?
just get some of that sweet Chinese money, guys. Like,
we need the Saudi. You need somebody that doesn't care about ROI. I mean, the Chinese in a lot of ways don't either. So,
so maybe we split this up into two, Rob. But like, we can keep this streaming on our end. Anything else on, because we didn't. I was like basically dead with the flu the last time the news came down on Colorado. But anything else on conference realignment? It's kind of a bummer. It just is. It's kind of the same thing. It's just stuff is happening, but we kind of knew this stuff was happening. I mean,
I'll say this. Like, I think the second that Kliavkoff presented an Apple deal, the conference was dead, right? And I think he knew that. And people are like, why didn't he present the deal? They've had this deal for a year. And I'm like, I think he knew what was going to happen. I think he knew that Fox and ESPN were going to like basically pull the conference apart in order to keep them from signing with Apple. So like, I mean, it's not that like, I just want to say like the Pac-12, like they made it like I think it takes a lot of heat. He said some dumb stuff in public. Fine. I think he had to sort of like rally the troops, whatever. I think they made one huge mistake. And then after that, I think the table was set. I think they let the Big 12 get in. I mean, yes, like to your point, like not expanding, letting USC dictate that was dumb, right? But I think letting the Big 12 get in front of them in getting a TV contract done, that killed them. That was it. Like there was no more big money left behind at ESPN and Fox. They had spent it on the Big 12. Like that was it.
Yeah.
Right. Like, so like once they made that mistake, right. And ESPN and Fox just sort of like sat back underbidding Apple, you know, like letting him sit on that deal and seeing if he would come back down to their number, knowing that if he presented the Apple deal that they were going to come do this to him.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's we almost should have led with that, because I think that is something that hasn't gone out there as much, because everybody's just dumping all over him. And I'm like, look, the guy, you're right. He did say some ridiculous things, but what are you going to say in these conferences? Like, you know, like you can't, if you are waiting, I mean, like if you're waiting and I mean, he was just trying to buy time, I think, to try to figure out something, but to your point, the cake was baked early. Yeah. And that was when the action was supposed to happen. I think the one thing, I'm fascinated with this Big 12 conference because, and we talked about this a little bit before we were recording, but I mean, UCF doesn't make sense and Cincinnati doesn't make sense from a travel standpoint, and West Virginia doesn't make sense.
I mean, the Cincinnati one is like, oh, I can go to some away games.
Yeah, that's true.
It's an easy drive and it's a cool stadium.
But if you're the Four Corner schools, you know, regionally it's not as bad. Like, I think the Big Ten looks stupid, right? Because I mean, that's such a long flight, and you think of the baseball players and the softball players. I mean, like it's dumb. The Big 12 is a little bit more regional. It's a little bit more quirky. I just think it has more of that college football culture where you do have the small schools, you do have teams that like kind of have to work for it. Whereas the Big Ten feels a little sterile. I'm afraid it's going to be more sterile. Like, I think the Big Ten and the SEC are going to turn into what we thought it was going to turn into, which sucks. Like, I really don't want to watch that. I have 4 kids now and like full-time job and all that stuff. And, you know, I'm looking at college football landscape and just going, you know, what part of this do I want to watch? And I think the Big 12 is part of that. I mean, the Big 10 is going to have awesome football games, and those players are going to be great. But I do think that there's going to be a more sterile environment to it as we keep moving forward and as more and more money gets spent. I just think it's going to be more professional, and that's a bummer.
Well, because like the majority of the Big Ten, I mean, like we talked about, like the Big Ten is not a Gorgon. It doesn't have a many-headed monster where you're going to be like Texas and Auburn, Texas and Georgia, Texas and Ole Miss, right? It's going to be Washington. Like Washington's not going to play Michigan every year. They're not going to play Ohio State every year. You're going to get some good games in there on the schedule, but you're going to get a lot of Iowa and Wisconsin and Northwestern and Rutgers and Indiana and Purdue and oh, buddy. Like, yeah. I mean, like, so
which to the point, like, that's a fun, those are fun non-conference games, right? Like, that was the whole charm. It was like, oh, they're playing Purdue. That's kind of funky. Right. Oh, they're going down to West Lafayette. How fun is that? But like, not in your conference games, you know, that's not what you want.
Well, I mean, but people like, I mean, like the Big Ten is carried. Like, I mean, like Fox Big Noon will basically like pick the Buckeyes against anyone.
Everybody,
anyone, because it doesn't matter, because that's how big a numbers Ohio State does, right? Like, I mean, and they absolutely do, right? But like, it's not going to like, you know, like you're in with the behemoth, right? Like that's the thing is I'm like, yeah, you'll get some decent spots, but you'll be going up against like the 3:30 SEC spot, right? Like on ESPN, you might get like the primetime spot on, you know, the NBC, right? Like, but like, it's true. Like I mean, the Big Ten, I mean, like adding USC was a really good get for them. Cause that's like kind of like adding another Michigan-ish type school, right? Yeah. The other one, like, I mean, Washington and Oregon, like that one, I'm just like, I mean, it does make it a little easier. Cause like now you can say like Washington and Oregon and USC and UCLA can all play each other every season. And then you sort of figure out pods or something like that. And maybe they can, who was it that had like no rivals? Was it like Penn State doesn't have any? They'll figure out some rivals for Penn State or something like that, right? In this protected rivalries. But like, that
like arranged marriages.
Yeah, I mean,
like
and it is true. Like Penn State's like another one in there, right? But like you're not gonna get like you're gonna have so much like ho hum like this sucks type games, and like I get it that like what I understand is that like if you're if you're one of those fans, you're like, how is that any different than playing Oregon State? And the difference is like history and distance. Like you probably know a lot of Beaver fans, right? Like a lot of Iowa fans out there in Seattle. Like, I mean,
and it's that like, oh, remember the Rogers brothers or there's just a lot of that where you just go, there's a lot of history there. Yeah, I totally feel you on that.
I mean, that's what makes it interesting. And the fact that like Oregon State's really going to get up for that game, right? Like, I mean, like they're going to give you a really good shot, like and stuff like that. Like, but also I got to say this is like, cause I think part of what makes these games sound so interesting is we get like I care about like, and I often say like, it's not how you play. It's not whether you win or lose. It's how you play the game. Cause that's how the model evaluates you, right? Like I really care about how you play the game. Humans care about wins and losses. Like we're wired to think that way. I mean, even as I watch Arizona, I'm like, I want wins, not and I'll take wins even if we don't deserve them. That is not like, so like these teams they're going to take some L's. Like you are going to take some losses in here, like Texas and Oklahoma, like teams that are used to piling up gaudy records in their own conferences. Part of what makes them really attractive matchups on the big TV to casual fans, right, who are not fans of those teams, is the gaudy records. And you're not going to have those now, right? So like casual fans are maybe like, I mean, sure, like Washington could be one of the best teams in the country. They also might have 3 or 4 losses towards the end of the season, right? Like for casual fans, like that's going to feel like a ho-hum game, at least until we maybe like get used to, whatever the new records are going to look like. But that's going to take a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. It'll be fascinating to see what, but I just love the hipster conference, because that's the Pac-12 or the Big 12. The Big 12 is going to be the hipster conference where it's like everybody tries, like, BYU's gonna be feisty, and it's gonna be tough playing there, and Cincinnati's trying to figure it out. That's gonna be kind of a disaster for a while.
Cincinnati's
but like
gonna be
Central
bad
Florida,
this year. BYU's also gonna be bad this year.
BYU. Oh yeah. But I mean, like just in general, like I think that you have schools that are committed to football, and that's not that wasn't the case with Stanford and Cal, and oftentimes like with other schools in the Pac-12 with the hires that they were making, like like Arizona, like let's go hire Kevin Sumlin and just sit on him for a while. There's just ASU, like, hey, let's hire Herm Edwards. It just seems that the Big 12 has this. There's a culture of college football there, and that will be fun. And I just think that there's just quirky teams and quirky coaches, and that's why I love college football. So. I'm curious to see what that looks like. We're not a basketball podcast. Obviously, that's like a Goliath on the college basketball front.
Right. The only thing I care about is I don't want to go to Kansas City. I want to go to Vegas.
Yeah. Oh, I know. Exactly. It was funny. Like, there's that one guy that was talking about he's like RIP T-Mobile Arena. I'm like, oh, you must not have been around.
No, the MGM was the truth, man. Like the best part of,
you're new here, aren't you?
There's like there was like no bad seats in the MGM. And like you're right on the court. I mean, every seat you feel like you're right on the dang court and there. But also it was like you could walk out in between. I mean, the food in the actual MGM arena was terrible. I mean, like boiled water hot dogs. I mean, just the worst food.
Oh, it's garbage.
But you could walk out into the casino and get all the food you wanted from the casino restaurants and then come back in. It was great. And like, so T-Mobile is like a sterile NBA type arena, NHL type arena. And you're like, yeah, all right, fine, whatever. Right. Like the MGM was great. Like, and you felt like you were like sitting like right with all the opposing fans. Like I went to an Arizona, He Touched the Ball. I was at the He Touched the Ball semifinal with Arizona and UCLA. And like, it was nuts in there between Arizona and UCLA fans. But like that sounds like way more like I can't imagine I'm sorry, but like I'm not going to Kansas's backyard for the Big 12 tournament in Kansas City. Like, oh yeah, I'm sure it's nice. There's lots of places that are nice. I've heard Indianapolis is nice. Like
The T-Mobile Arena reminds me of like when a Sears goes out of business and they're trying to fill the spot, and then a costume palace shows up, and for Halloween, and they sell the things and then they tear it all down.
Yeah.
Like that's what T-Mobile Arena feels like. It feels like it feels temporary.
Right.
Like let's just hang all the banners up and then take them all down and hope that the building doesn't fall apart. Like it's just I hate that. I
will say too is like getting into a good basketball conference is fun. Like the Big 12 is going to be a really fun basketball conference in the way that the Pac-12 was very, very much not.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I know.
I mean, like no one cared about basketball.
Well, talk about your L's too, right? I mean,
yeah.
Like Arizona's not going to be. It's not going to be an easy conference. Like you're not going to be able to run over Oregon State and Washington State.
And I think that's a good thing because I think Arizona and UCLA got a wee bit placid. I think they got a
little pudgy.
They did. They got, there was they went in the NCAA tournament with some gaudy records, and they lost to some saviors of the world.
Yeah. They weren't running every day. Yeah. They were just every 3 days.
When you only got to go out and beat Oregon State, or Cal or Stanford. I mean, what's the big deal, right? Like,
all right. So we're going to keep recording, right? This is the magic of video. We're going to go into the Oregon. Do you have time to do Oregons?
I do. Oregon? My kid is going to pop over in a bit. I'll have to go upstairs and let him in and get him started on like a Harry Potter movie, and he'll play Legos, and then I'll come down and finish. Okay. So there may be like a 10-minute break, but he's not over here yet.
Okay. All right. So thank you for listening. We're going to do Oregon and Oregon State. I'll probably release them on the same day. So we have our disaster realignment, Titanic shifting of the plates.
I titled this, and behold, a pale horse.
There we go. That's great. All right. So we're going to do stick around for Oregon State on the podcast, and then we'll just do that now. Welcome back, everyone, to 12 Pack Radio, your podcast source for Pac-12 football news, the home of the Beta Rank College Football Statistical Model. This is Brian Conger. We are in the last ride of the Mohicans, or the last ride of Wide Open as Immortals. This is the last season of the Pac-12. We just covered this on the live stream, and also we'll drop that as a podcast too. Today, though, we are talking Oregon and Oregon State. We're doing our previews for both teams. There is football to be had. These are interesting teams. I'm joined always by Rob Barron from Sharp College Football. Rob, how are you, sir?
I mean, I've been better. Yesterday was like the most emotional roller coaster I think I've ever been on. I woke up and I was like, "Oh my God, this is the most amazing head fake ever!" And then it all just immediately fell apart.
They tried. At least they tried, right? They didn't take it lying down. They rolled out the same contract yet again.
Right.
Trying to make sure everybody remembered all the old times, the good and bad that we've had, and it's still the Big Ten was like, here's some money, please come over here. But that is neither here nor there. We just covered that for about 45 minutes. You can listen to that on the other podcast. We are previewing Oregon and Oregon State. I did my Oregon preview, Rob. And I popped up all the recruiting rankings, and I've been like, we track this stuff, but I'm just like, hot damn, man! Like this team has been recruiting at a really high level.
Yeah.
An interesting year last year, obviously. But we'll start with Oregon. Bo Nix with a competent offensive coordinator worked. Right. That was one where I saw the guy for 4 years, and I'm like, I don't know if he's actually got it. Let's see what happens. And he was good. He was really good for Oregon. And they had a lot of things going for them. Obviously, they had like 8 good running backs, and so Bucky Irving ended up being the guy that. So they were good on the ground. They were good through the air. They finally, Rob, had wide receivers for the first time in like a decade, where that actually weren't there to block and suck, basically. Right. Which has been the case with them.
How long are your arms? Not for catching footballs, like for blocking.
Yeah. Let me see those muscles. Offensive line obviously has been really built up over Mario Cristobal, and the defense was a disaster. What was this Oregon team last year in terms of the numbers on the offensive side, and then we can shift over to defense after that. But
so offensive,
let's start with the good stuff.
Offensively they were really good. I mean, they were number 11 overall in Beta Rank. And look, I mean, like I know Joe Moorhead did not get a ton of credit at Oregon, but I feel like he cobbled together out of what he had in a lot of ways. Like, I don't know that he did a ton developing quarterbacks at Oregon, but I think with Anthony Brown, he did the best that he could do with what he had there. But they were being at 11 overall last season was really good. They struggled a little bit at drive efficiency, being able to finish off long drives, put together, and sustain drives to put up points, but they were incredibly explosive. Number 5 overall in explosive drives. And if you watched Oregon last season, you definitely saw a lot of that. Number 23 in play efficiency. So they struggled a little bit at their per play average outside of explosives. 16 in negative drives, few too many 3 and outs, few too many turnovers, definitely something they can improve on coming in the next season. 25 in effective rush. And to your point, like 13 in effective pass. And like, that's a huge improvement. I mean, we haven't really seen an Oregon team throw the ball around like they did last season in a really, really long time. And I think that, their ability to sort of resurrect Bo Nix's career, Kenny Dillingham ran, I think, a really fun, interesting offense. I do like their offensive coordinator, Stein, who they got from UTSA. I thought that was a really good pickup for them. But
who also said, by the way, he's going to keep things fairly similar, which you should, right? You got a returning quarterback, returning running back. You got good wide receivers. There's a lot comes back, and that makes sense for him to keep things. I'm sure he'll throw some wrinkles in and all that, but he does seem like we're going to get a lot more of the same. Yeah,
I mean, they're at number 54 overall, and Bill Connolly's returning production on the offensive side of the foot. Or no, wait, I'm sorry, 63 overall. They've got 65% coming back. That's a decent amount. They're recruiting, they've had some good, but their last 2 years recruiting, and some of this is the coaching change turnover that they've had. They grade out at 20 overall in their overall 2-year rolling average. So they definitely they've had some good players, but their overall classes have taken a little bit of a per player hit. Now, I say that as I don't do it because it is more accurate. I know fans are always looking at the recruiting services rankings. I don't care about those. It is per star average, per player average. And that is more correlated with performance.
Yeah. So that's interesting because if you take a look, I'm curious where those numbers, because this past year, holy smokes, Rob, basically everybody on this roster is a 4-star. And that's pretty impressive for. I know Oregon's used to recruiting good players, but it's just you go up. That was the one thing that stood out for me is you go up and down the roster. Now we'll talk about the defense because the defense underperformed, and we'll see what happens this year. But on the offensive side, offensive line, wide receivers, the running backs, everybody on this team is a blue chip player basically.
Yeah, but you flip that around, and if you went and looked at USC, you'd have more a few more 5-stars running around. You go look at Ohio State, you got a lot more 5-stars running around. You go look at Georgia and Alabama, you have even more. I think that there's a lot of high-end talent there, but I think that what is they have been recruiting pretty well. And I think this year they're doing even better. So Oregon recruiting is not in any, and I think that their focus on the trenches is smart and right. But they're not recruiting as well as they have even when they were rolling into Cristobal. But you shouldn't. That's okay. When you have coaching turnover, that stuff can happen. You can have 1 year that'll drag you down a little bit or something. I think they're going to be more than fine recruiting.
Yeah, I think the thing that's interesting to me too is they've really done work in the transfer portal.
Yeah,
and you saw that last year. You see that this year, and they've hit on most of their guys that they've brought in. So it's not like they bring in these 4-star backups from Ohio State that are cast-offs for a reason. For the most part, the guys that they're bringing in are pretty solid. Bo Nix and Bucky Irving.
Yeah.
Example 1 and example 2, right? Where, obviously Nix is the story. When he went down, I think one thing to keep in mind if you're looking at quarterback, the first thing I should just say, I'm so excited that he had a good year. Yeah. I think sometimes we do these previews and we'll just skip over somebody being really awesome, and then we go to the part that worries us. Good for him. He really showed a lot of ability, and he's going to get drafted because of because of that change.
Really up until and the injury hampered him a bit, in that game, that they had against you. Utah had a little bit of a wind-aided back end their stretch for that defense. But that, where he's injured in that game, he got injured against Washington. and then that carried over through the rest of the season. But he was so good. I mean, in particular, I think as a passer, and I think that they really found ways to make him really comfortable in ways that he wasn't in the Malzahn offense, right? And I have some critiques of the Malzahn offense at the Power 5 level when I previewed Auburn or UCF or something. But I think they did just such a good job, and he really shined. And that's to your point, that's awesome, right? When guys get to have redemption stories, that's fun because you shouldn't be rooting against people in this.
Yeah. So with that said, I'm gonna set Bo Nix aside and put him on his pedestal over here on the right.
Heisman candidate Bo Nix. Let's good stuff over there. We covered it. No,
this team did not trust Ty Thompson at all.
No,
and look, again, I'm 5'11", 165 pounds. If somebody tackled me from the blind side, I'm out for the rest of the year and I never play football again. Ty Thompson you only get a scholarship to Oregon as a quarterback if you can play football. Yeah. But you reach another level, and you could just see the fact that they rolled out Bo Nix hurt.
Yeah,
tells you exactly what they think of Ty Thompson. He gets in, and I remember I think they were playing against Utah, and I'm like, he's not going to throw the football. He's just going to run. And Utah was like, yep, he's going to run.
Yeah.
You could just tell that and I think there was fumbles, and I just think that they're going to go with the true freshman. I think the guy's name is Austin Nonasid. I feel that's how you pronounce his name. But I'm just, this team is they're not as quarterback heavy, as some other teams that don't have the talent behind him. I'm trying to think of a good, Tulane, right? You got a good quarterback.
Yeah,
and
Michael Pratt.
Gets down, your team sucks.
Yeah.
They have talent, and they have a running game, and they have an offensive line. But if Bo Nix goes down, this team loses some games. So I just want to plant a flag there.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I think there's a reasonable case for Oregon struggling at quarterback development for a while. Justin Herbert was good at Oregon, but you often had real questions about, and then he gets drafted in the NFL and you're like, where was this guy? What were they even doing? Right. And some of that's the play calling and scheme design and all of that. But I think they've had a little bit of a quarterback development problem. And I think, you hope Dillingham was able to really clean some of that up, I think, at least last year. And then Stein should help this season. But Ty Thompson, that guy was a 5-star. Everyone wanted him. And the fact that he's come in and just, it's not just him. They've had a couple other quarterbacks that have.
Oh yeah. There was the carousel that stayed there forever, right? You had, Robbie Ashford, Jay Butterfield, Blaster in the back, all these.
Who's the guy that's at Texas Tech?
Oh gosh.
The QB. He had
I know who you're talking about.
Tyler
Shuck.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think there's, but some of it is you're going to have a fall off. You could say this about Utah. You could say this about USC. You could say this about Washington. Some of it is you just have such great quarterbacks that understand the offense that they are in the conference. All of those teams have this watch out, I would say, to some extent. But yeah, I think if you're Oregon, right, they didn't trust Ty Thompson at all. And so if you're coming back to if you have an injury and it is the true freshman, that could hurt, right? So you definitely, and Nix is going to run. He's going to get tackled some, right? There's no getting around that in the offense, and their scheme. So, and that's a bad thing. It's just, you run a little more risk with that.
Yeah. No. And obviously, hopefully we don't want that to happen.
Right.
It's more just, I feel like I'm almost putting a negative aspect on this, but I think there's going to be a significant drop off if that happens. Sometimes you have, I think Washington from Penix to Morris is not the drop off you're going to see here if there's an injury. And look, this I say this only because look, if this was Arizona or Washington State or Stanford, we wouldn't be harping on this so much. But this is a team that wants to win the conference and compete for a playoff spot.
Yeah. So the defense takes a step forward, and you're talking about them like that, right? The offense has to hold up its end of the bargain again, of course, too, right? And they're the only one out of the major, the sort of contenders that we're talking about that did lose their OC, right? Now he's going to Arizona State to be the head coach, but they're the only one that had a change at the sort of engine of the team type unit, right? So like there is like I like the hire. I always say this, mileage may vary when it's a new play caller, either new to this team or new overall. We have a lot of faith in him. I think he's a really good hire, but like people tell me this about like, who's it? Mike Bobo being back at Georgia. I've had Georgia fans like, he's promised to run the exact same system. I'm like, but it's still Mike Bobo calling the plays, right? Like you can give him the same car. It doesn't guarantee the same speed, right? Like in the same results.
So, some people open that Cheesecake Factory menu and they pick the right thing. Some of them don't. There's a lot of options on that.
And so, like, I mean, it's just like mileage may vary a little bit, but like I think this offense is going to be really, really good. I'm interested to see if they can improve the run game, because I do think that like what they have to improve on is consistency type stuff. Like they do need to be able to sustain drives and not be I'm not saying they need to be less explosive, but they need to also finish so that they are not as reliant on explosive drives, and they need to avoid turnovers and avoid 3 and outs. And I think another year of under the same coaching staff largely is going to help with that.
It seemed like if there was a weakness in this offense, it was if they got behind the chains.
Yeah.
A little bit. There was some difficult. Now look, we're nitpicking a little bit, but that's what happens when you're a really good program, right?
Right.
We kind of dive into the things where, all right, this could be a weakness. But I think that was one where if they didn't get out in front of the defenses, things tightened up a little bit. So there's something to keep an eye on.
Substantially, the biggest problem is the defense.
Was that? Oh, yeah.
Like substantially the biggest problem was holy moly. I mean, this was like, we can transition because I don't want to, the offense should be great. Like it's the same story as USC and Washington. It's like, oh, they could go. So like, it's like a Dr. Seuss, like the places you could go. Like, if we see progress on the defensive side, like, because their defense was, of the bad defenses, the teams at the top of the conference, was the better of the 3 between Washington, USC, and Oregon, but still like 46 overall in beta rank. That is the wrong side of a middle of the road Power 5 defense. They have way too much talent to be this bad. 43 in drive efficiency, 58 in explosive drives. They gave up a lot of big plays, struggled with play efficiency, 64, not enough 3 and outs and turnovers, 39 in negative drives. They were okay against the run, 27 in effective rush, 73 in effective pass. And we've talked about Pac-12, they're throw the ball. Unless you're playing Oregon State, like we talked about this with Washington, is like, oh, they just have to fix this one part. Well, it's kind of the most important part if you look across the conference. Like, unless Cam Rising is hurt and Utah loses every tight end that they have again, like you're not going to be confronted by a lot of like, hey, we're just going to line up and run the ball at you. Like everybody's looking to throw the ball.
Yeah. It just real fast, because I want to make sure, because some people aren't. We have a lot of Oregon listeners, but some aren't. I just want to run down real fast. Right? We talked about the quarterback. We talked about the running back. The reason we're jumping to the defense so quickly is because, hot damn, like Troy Franklin returns. Gary Bryant Jr. Joined the team. They got a bunch of their wide receiving core is one of the best in the conference, and they bring in a lot of transfers. They recruited well on that front, and then as always, the offensive line is good, right? So you have a lot of, they lose some players, but they return a lot of backups that rotated into that so the line should be fine. So this is going to be a top 15 minimum offense.
Oregon was like 3 in line yards last year according to Football Outsiders, and they were number 2 in sack rate. And that's going to travel again because you have Nick's back again, right? Like he completed 71%, over 71% of his passes. That's bonkers.
Yeah. The thing, but like shifting to defense, because now we have some problems, because as I recall, there was some trouble getting home on sacks and blitzes.
Yeah.
Which I guess maybe why you saw them not be able to cover well, because it's possible that the corners just didn't have the time.
Right.
Now Popo Malve returns, and he was legit in 2021. He was injured last year, so he's going to be that anchor in the middle. I think you have Taki Tiami, who is the Washington transfer, in the middle. So you have two nose tackles that should be pretty solid. You bring back Brandon Dorless. You bring back Casey Rogers. They bring back a lot of players, but this is the boggling part for me is they bring back a lot of players that, yeah, you look good and you have the pedigree, but you sucked last year. Like Oregon, I just want to be very clear. For the talent that Oregon had, that defense sucked.
Yeah.
And there was multiple games where you just go and you look around, you go like, what on earth is this? Because the talent is there, and it was the first year. I get it, first year, first head coach. But sometimes there's those, and I'll use Washington as an example, and Oregon fans are probably throwing stuff at the radio right now as we're talking about it. But Kalen DeBoer comes in, offensive mind, offensive coach, the offense is better, right?
Right.
Flip it over on this side, you have a defensive coach coming from Georgia, defensive mind, defensive coach, the defense is garbage, and it was not a talent problem.
No.
So what am I supposed to do with that, Rob?
No, I know. Well, so some of the, we had questions. I mean, and we have questions. How much is Lanning involved? I mean, because look, we talked about this, Tosh Lapoy, who was the defensive coordinator, got play calling duties taken away from him at Alabama. Right. And then he went off, he left, he went to the NFL to be a position coach for a long time. He is a nuclear weapon in recruiting. Tosh Lapoy is one of the best recruiters in college football. So it was kind of always when is he coming back? And he's really good on the West Coast. I don't know. I mean,
I don't think he's a good play caller.
No. And there are people we talked to last year that were talking about how long. I mean, we definitely heard rumors that he had play calling taken away again or something like that. I don't know if that was the case. I mean, if you've heard differently inside the Oregon football, facility, let us know. But he's back again. And some of this, I am looking at the chat. I can't type and do this at the same time. I apologize. I'm inexperienced at this. This line.
While you're saying that, it's possible. Maybe I took a step a little too far when I said this defense sucked. I mean, they gave up 41 to Washington State. I mean, they got stomped by Georgia, but everybody gets stomped by Georgia. Some of the big games that I recall, right? That UCLA game. I mean, UCLA had a good offense. In the Washington game, Washington had a good offense, and North Carolina had a good offense. Oregon State, that one worries me a little bit, but there was a little bit of quirky stuff that happened in that game.
Yeah.
So it's possible that I'm, maybe it's not as bad as I recall. So maybe I should walk that where this defense sucked. It wasn't a good defense. I don't know if it sucked.
I mean, probably their best game. If you look at what their weaknesses was the game at Arizona, because Arizona played really bad and confused in that game.
Yeah.
And my kid's here, so we're gonna have to pause.
Okay.
I'll be right back. This is the Civil War was neither a war nor civil. Discuss, right? From Saturday Night Live. All right. All right, I'm back. Let me text Bryant. If you are watching this, this is what happens on a Saturday afternoon.
All right.
Cool.
Oh, give me 1 second. Hold on.
I don't know whether it's my ears are too big for these earbuds or
okay. So I guess I'm waffling back and forth because what I saw on television, and I watched a lot of the Oregon games. It's likely it was because it was the big games against UCLA and Washington that really jumped out,
right,
as being like, oh, this defense sucks. Well, yeah, it depends on who you're playing. Like,
right.
They played two of the most prolific offenses in the country and gave up a lot of points. But what can we like? It's just interesting to see what we can expect because the defensive line returns,
right,
and they add the tackle, right. I think the linebackers are interesting-ish. They bring in some transfers. They brought in a guy from Iowa.
Yeah.
They have a lot of 4-star guys that are in the background. They brought in Jordan Birch from South Carolina, who's supposed to be a really good pickup. Obviously, Mace Foon is still there.
Right.
So, but behind them, it's like the transfer from ASU and a bunch of 4-star freshmen and redshirt freshmen.
Yeah.
They could be good. But that front seven is just interesting to me. I don't quite know what to make of it yet.
Even if when you go back to like when they had Thibodeau, like they don't ever seem to be like the sum of their parts seems lesser than you would expect, right? Like
yeah.
And I feel like since who's the guy that went to Boise State? Was the defensive coordinator.
Andy Avalos.
Yeah, since Avalos, like it's been a bit of that, and even guys that were like, man, DeRuyter went to Texas Tech and was really good. He was bad at Oregon, right? Like they seem to just we talk about like development, I think they've struggled a little bit with defensive development, right? Like even with the guy, the guy that got drafted, off of
Christian Gonzalez.
Christian Gonzalez, that transferred in from Colorado, right? Like even with him, they stunk.
Yeah.
Right. Like, even with him, you could throw all over Oregon for the most part. Right. And like, that's really, yes, you did face, but like these numbers that we have in beta rank are opponent adjusted, right? Like that's what's important is like, they're actually controlling for who you played. So like, yeah, they played some good offenses, but they didn't do that well against them. Right. Like, and they also didn't do that well against some bad offenses like Washington State. Like that Washington State game was bonkers, but they also let Cam Ward look like he knew what he was doing for a while, which almost no one did last year.
Yeah, that's true. I think the thing to like, if you're the glass half full is that there should be, the talent's all over. Like you look at this again, like I mentioned, I don't think there's anybody on this roster. Maybe I don't remember Casey Rogers. He came over from Nebraska. I don't know what, but like basically everybody that I'm looking in the 2 deep, it is a 4-star or better, or a transfer that has played. So there's a world where the defense improves in the second year, and particularly like up in front where that was the strength. Use strength almost in air quotes, but the strength of the defense was the front seven. That could improve.
Yeah.
But going over to the left, Bridges, the cornerback, I don't think he was really that good last year. And now you lose Christian Gonzalez, to your point, Rob, and you bring in, Dante Manning, who was a backup. Now he was a 5-star backup, so he could really pop this year. We don't know.
Yeah.
And transfers, right? You bring in a backup from Alabama, and those are coin flips, like at best, I think, with some of those Alabama cast-offs.
Right.
Jalir Florence is. They bring in Nico Reed, like a a corner from Colorado.
Yeah, I mean, that's like, it feels like, listen, like the transfer portal is wonderful. Like you can go in and get a bunch of players, but it's also like I mean, look, this is how I would do it, right? Like I would try to get not just guys that I liked. I would also, if I was really knew I needed to fill some spots, bring in a lot of guys, right? Like, because chances are you're going to hit on somebody. But it just, I don't know. It feels like, again, like this defense should just be better. Like you just kind of feel like you look across these players and like, what are they doing? You know, like, and to your point of like, they need to generate a better pass rush. They struggled last year with that. They need to generate, like, that's going to help the coverage, but they struggled a lot in coverage last season. That's what kind of worries me is like, I think when you run through it, you know, is that like, there's some things that like you could see getting better. And again, like they weren't in a spot where they were, you know, like the worst, you know, like, you know, they're still a decent team overall. I think if you look at like their, you know, like relative to Pac-12 defenses, which were horrible. So like for them, improvement like is probably getting up into the 20-ish, right? But like if you have a defense in the 20s, like you could, like this Oregon offense takes a step forward this season, let's say. You get the defense up into the 20s. That's maybe good enough to get to the Pac-12 and get a playoff spot. You go into the playoff with a defense in the 20s. Like you better hope you have a TCU lucky game in that semifinal.
Yeah,
because at some point you're gonna get what happened to TCU in the final, right? Like you have a defense that bad, you're just gonna get punched in the mouth a lot. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think Oregon's aspiration, I mean, like Phil Knight's wants a national title more than anything in the history of the world before he passes. You know, and I think Oregon, I don't know that it's quite like national title or it's not national title or bust, like I think within the program, but I think they definitely have their eyes at a playoff spot. And if they do, I think they'd like to show up and play well. I think that like, you don't want to show up and just get rocked. So the defense probably needs to improve even more. It's just, I guess what it is, it's hard to see. Like there's no clear difference makers that they have transferred in. There's some players that you like that maybe didn't work out at other places. There's some players that you like at Oregon that might improve a lot, but clearly the best player off the defense is gone, off of a unit that outside of him was horrible.
Yeah. I do think the big area of improvement that we should see now let's it's the safety positions.
Yeah.
So I think even Oregon fans would say like the safety, you know, Steve Stevens and I think it was Brian Addison were not good last year. And so they bring in two transfers. They bring in Tysheem Johnson from Ole Miss, who was pretty good. And they bring in Whiskey Baron Evan Williams
nice.
Out of Fresno State. And it's Fresno State. You know, you bring in a Fresno State corner. Okay, you know, he could be awesome. Like let's see.
Right.
247 puts him as a 4-star transfer, so he could be okay.
Right.
But you would like the positive way of looking at this is, okay, we shored up the safety at least better. We have a lot of talent. We brought in some transfers to fill some holes in the secondary, and our front seven's better.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, I think they can get to 20, and that's an opportunity to win the conference.
Right.
But yeah, I don't think that this is a national title team, but this is a team that will compete for the conference. Now they have some teams they're going to have to deal with, right? Obviously USC and Utah. But I do think that they're going to be there. And when you take a look at this roster, like just the talent is so good.
Yeah.
And I do think this is a professional staff.
Yeah.
So you would hope that defense does get better. If you're an Oregon fan and your defense is like 30 or 35, like that's where I think even in year 2, you have to start questioning how much did Dan Lanning do on defense at Oregon or at Georgia?
Well, I mean, truly. You know? I mean, yeah, truly. I mean, but he's gotta, I mean, like for Lanning, like this is like, who was it? I'm trying to remember. Like there was a coach that was like, this is your specialty. What's going on here? Like, why are you so bad? I mean, like Lanning's got to button up the defense, right? Like, he can't be a coach that just like, cause like the weird thing is like a lot of defensive coaches struggle to hire. Like, I mean, it's just like a weird thing. Like defensive coaches had defensive coordinators and they become head coaches often struggle to hire offensive coordinators. Lanning did not. he made out and hit a home run higher, but like he hasn't been able to get his side of the ball figured out. But if they really do, I mean, if they got into like the top 15, that's a really, really fun team. But the other part too is like, we shouldn't like Washington's defense is going to get better. They were so bad, they have to get better. USC's defense is going to get better. They were so bad, they have to get better, right? Like Oregon State's offense is going to get better, right? Now we'll see what happens with their defense. They lost a lot, but like they play everybody. They don't miss anybody in the conference that this season at all. Now you do luck out and you also get Colorado and Stanford this season. But, like Washington State's offense is probably better with the new OC in there, right? Like you miss Arizona this year. That's probably good because I do think Arizona, I think Oregon still beats Arizona like 9.5 times out of 10. But Arizona's a team that like on a hot day, like when they played Washington, on a hot day can make your life a little miserable if they're hot on offense, right? Like, particularly with the way they like to throw the ball around, but you miss them. But like, you've got to play Utah, Oregon State, USC, Washington, all of them, and you get USC at home, you get Oregon State at home, you're at Washington, you're at Utah. It's a, they're gonna have to run the gauntlet this season to get to the top.
Yeah, and the good thing is, again, if you're an Oregon fan, the talent is there to do it.
Yeah,
like this is a team that really legitimately should be. I mean, there's a reason that the odds are low on them, and there's a chance there's a playoff. If you squint, not even if you squint, if they just take care of business and beat the teams that they'll get there.
Right,
this team is good enough to do that. All right, let's move to Oregon State, which I think is even more kind of like fascinating.
This is like everybody's fun dark horse. Like
yeah. And let's do it right after this. All right, we're back. We're talking Oregon State football. I mean, let's just. I'm not even. There's no preface. DJU transferred from Clemson, and this is the story. Like,
right, like,
this is the story.
For the first time in the history of ever. Because we've talked about just get a quarterback, Jonathan.
yeah, it's like for the love of all that's good in the world. This is it was funny. Somebody said I forget which quarterback. It was one of the USC cast-offs, and
JT Daniels, wasn't it?
Yeah, he asked for like a house, and like this is ridiculous. He asked for a house. I'm like, how much is a house in Corvallis?
Right, like what is
for like $50,000? Yeah.
Like what did he want you to build it from scratch? Just get him a house, man. Like.
Yeah.
What like
I think it's interesting with them because there's been a lot because they got Adian Childs the freshman quarterback that they brought in.
Yeah.
Apparently is freaking awesome. Like he's really, really good, and he's the future of this program. I think it's interesting because we had just talked about the drop off between Bo Nix and whoever the quarterback is. Like this Oregon State program is the opposite of that. Because you have DJU, you have Childs, who is supposed to be just tearing it up, and then him with Jonathan Smith. And then Ben Branson came in as a true freshman, and he wasn't great,
right? But
he was fine. Like that's a good drop off.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like I think that, I mean, look, and I want to say this because like I made this argument about Penix, but Penix like at least had like some real like at least like when DeBoer was there, like really good years at Indiana. DJU, it was not his, like what happened to Clemson was not his fault. Like he wasn't great there, but like Clemson has a brand new offensive coordinator in for a reason, right? Like, I mean, and then now they finally made a really good hire, and he also got beat out by another unbelievable 5-star talent, right? So like, I don't think people should be looking at that and being like, oh, he's damaged goods. Like, buyer beware on damaged goods. Because, like, Jonathan Smith got Jake Luton to the NFL, which is which is just like, man, like that is like, you can like, you could probably turn like, like dirt into gold at that point, like, so I think, and like the offense, now look, the offense still has a little bit of a pass catcher problem, but
a little bit of a
a lot of a pass catcher problem, but it doesn't have, I think what's interesting versus like last 2 seasons, you might say, is it doesn't have a quarterback problem, right? And like we always talk about is like the offensive line with Jim Mahalchek there is rinse and repeat. It's going to be good.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and I actually think like people nationally, and I don't want to take all the credit for it for us for saying this, but like people nationally have started to catch on of like, yeah, the Beavs always have a really great offensive line. Like, duh, you know, like,
yeah. Welcome to the welcome to the party, pal. Yeah. So, the thing that's interesting with me is you hear all this rumbling, oh, Childs going to be the quarterback. I will, full disclosure, I wanted all the Charlie Brewer smoke, 15 for 15 in the spring game, Charlie Brewer smoke. So let's, I will let's call a spade here.
That's like my one of just like when Utah fans come back to me and like, you don't know ball. And I was like, I fucking called that one. Like you, sorry, this is a family podcast, but like when Utah fans say that to me, I'm like, I'm going to go look on your Twitter feed to look for the Charlie Brewer tweets, my friends. Cause I was like, look out for Cam Rising. Cause I watched Charlie Brewer at Baylor.
So it is possible that I'm going down the same path where I'm like, oh, I want all the DJU smoke. That guy's the truth. But this is more a play on. I think, and I would, if I were to bet money, I would bet money that he's the quarterback the whole year.
Yeah.
Unless he gets injured. And this is a Jonathan Smith play where I just think that Jonathan Smith is going to come up with ways to be creative and actually unlock. I just make him competent. I don't know if he has to be explosive. He just has to be pretty good, and I think he's pretty good.
Here's the thing: there's still going to be like last season. Like this offense was 35 overall in beta rank, right? Like with basically a tight end and an offensive line and a running back. Like that's
an injured tight end too. Like Musgrave played 4 games or something like that. Yeah,
like that was the cupboard, right? Like, yeah. And so you and they still managed to be a middle of the road Power 5 offense. Like they were not terribly explosive. They were pretty efficient. They had too many 3 and outs, few too many turnovers. They were 22 in effective rush, still with basically no threat of a passing game. Like 0 threat of play action, right? Like, so even if your pass catchers aren't great, like you can play action DJU to death in this offense, right? Like you can, and defenses bite on play action no matter what. Like they'll bite on play action even if you don't have a running game. But if you do have an effective running game, they'll bite on play action, right? And like they should be like, I'm not saying that this offense is going to be amazing, but they should be significantly improved. And DJU gives them the threat of a passing game that I think is going to open things up for them. Because I think last season you could basically sit in man coverage against them and stack the box because you knew what was coming.
Yeah. So they returned Damian Martinez, who was just awesome last year. Just a complete revelation. I think he was a true freshman. They bring back Deshaun Fenwick. I want to say one of their transfers transferred out, but like there's enough talent. They've recruited okay. Where there's the running game is going to be fine, but if Martinez stays healthy, this running game is awesome.
I never worry about them with running back either. They're like, oh, we lose this person. I'm like, yeah, well, you know, like it's like Utah linebacker these days. You're like, yeah, well, that'd be good, you know. Like, who's it going to be?
I learned that I forget. It was BJ Baylor. I'm like, there's no way he's going to be better than the other guy. And he was pretty darn good.
Just like, who's this like 2 or 3 star from like some Northern California high school that I've never heard of that like they unearthed, and you're like, oh well, he went for like 900 yards. Like, okay,
yeah, he's in the NFL now. Like you mentioned, the line's going to be good. Jim Mahalchek, they return everybody except their starting guard, by the way, too. This is a
great.
This is they're at the point now where like their walk-ons are getting scholarship offers because Mahalchek is their coach. Like it's great. It's cool. Yeah. It's a good story.
No, they're at number 18 in returning production on offense, and Bill Connolly's returning production, and they get DJU. Like there's just a lot to like on this side of the ball.
Here's the big gaping hole, though, right? There is nobody on this team that is a proven pass catcher.
No. Like that's where it's like you got to play action them to death. Like you got to find ways.
They do bring in Jermaine Terry, he was the former 4-star tight end from Cal that didn't really do a whole lot there.
Okay.
It's possible that they can and then the backup tight end behind them is a blocking tight end.
Okay.
So I think it might be Jack Velling, who's like this 3-star guy, kind of a higher 3-star tight end that might actually take the spot. And then it's after that, it's short. This is Arizona offense, short guys and guys.
The Rich Rod, the Rich Rod wide receiver room.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where like if you were playing like pickup basketball, you'd be like, none of these guys, none of these guys are on my team. Yeah, that's like, look, I mean, Oregon State has trouble, like you're not going to be able to necessarily go out and recruit, and even get out of the transfer portal guys that I think are going to unlock. Like, I think to your point, like they've got to coach up and get the most out of their tight ends that they can. I mean, this offense is set up to like wreck your life with seam routes out of the tight ends,
Yeah, for real.
And if like truly, if they can find a way to basically run they will be able to run the football, and then like, I mean, they'd be like a fun version. Like them in Utah would basically have the same offense. But I think that's entirely possible, because I do think that the tight ends are, to your point, like talented enough to take some of the heat, right? Like, and that's what they need, is they just need something that can to be able to unlock the defense, like be able to, keep them from stacking the box and always coming in looking for the run game. And look too, I mean, like I would say this, because I think people always blame the quarterback. They're like, of course, and on like the TV feed that we, as normal people get to see, like we have no idea what the wide receivers are doing. So people be like, the quarterback's just holding on to the football. I'm like, that might be telling us something. Like there's information in this, like guys aren't getting open, right? Like, I do think that though, that the flip side of it is sometimes the quarterback's just not getting the ball out, not getting things done. So like I'm interested to see, because I don't think we've seen any of these guys with a really competent quarterback. So I'm interested to see if that they're a little better than maybe we think. I'm not saying a lot better, if they're a little better than maybe we think. But I do think, to your point, like unless somebody emerges, I think the best version of this offense is probably a top 20 offense. Not a top 10, like a top 20 offense where they're able to really get the tight ends involved and occasionally get the wide receivers involved. And when they do get the receivers involved, it's probably more off of play action. And then, like using the tight ends, for stuff over the middle. And I think that would really work. Like to your point about the transfer from Cal, like, I mean, what was that guy's coaching like? I mean, I'm sure they'll get a lot more out of him in Oregon State. Like Oregon State truly is just like, send us your poor, your huddled masses, and we will take them and turn them into like a world beating economy. Like I think they can do that kind of thing with some like some spare parts from other programs that didn't quite work out. But I am like, as much as we talk about this with Utah, like year in, year out, it feels like, it's like, it just doesn't feel like the wide receiver position is a real threat. And that probably is going to place an upwards, a top ceiling on how far this offense can go.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's absolutely. So if you're, top 20 is probably the ceiling, but the floor is high.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think like DJU needs to work to get into the NFL.
Yeah.
They're going to run him. Like, I think they use his legs, and I think he doesn't just sit back there when he has to. I think he's going to have to get out and get around sometimes.
Because Football Outsiders had them at like number 10 in line yards. That's really good, considering they have no passing game whatsoever last season, right? Like, what's coming. They had a high sack rate. They were 27 overall in sack rate, higher sack rate. And I think DJU is going to help them cut down on that. For sure. I mean, like I think that there's real optimism, about, where this offense could be. Even without, I mean, like, of course you would love it if someone had transferred in that was a pass catcher. You would, like if you took Jacob Cowing and like that went to Arizona, and he had he had a bonkers year last year for Arizona too. So it's not like Arizona hasn't used him, But can you imagine him and Jonathan Smith's offense with DJU? Like, holy moly, right? Like, all of a sudden, this offense is like has top 5 potential. That's crazy.
Yeah, I was shocked that they did bring in somebody that was, because they have in the past, like Trayshawn Harrison was their best wide receiver last year, if I'm not mistaken. He was a Florida State transfer. Like he came over from the East Coast, and they've tried to pull in like Micaiah Tongue is like a converted linebacker now. It just totally didn't work out. 4-star wide receiver, I think, out of Georgia. So they've tried. They just didn't try this. Yeah. They didn't try. They didn't land.
Right. I mean, getting a quarterback is a big step for them.
Yeah, I know that's true. Yeah, if I had one or the other, there's definitely one I'm going to be leaning towards. Let's get to the defense, and let's do that right after this. All right, here's the problem. Here's the problem with the defense. We're back, by the way. All the good players left. I mean, not all of them. I know. But like, so what was this defense, Rob? Because it was pretty darn good. I was shocked at how good.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about the improvement they made year over year, right? Because like the year before they had made huge strides, and I had to do a big, for the year they did huge strides, and I had to do a big mea culpa on Trent Bray because I was like, they need to bring in somebody outside. The offense is really working, and Jonathan Smith knew what he was doing because they made the jump all the way up to 8 overall in beta rank. This was far and away the best defense in the Pac-12. They were 12 at drive efficiency. They did a good job limiting teams' abilities to put together big plays. They were number 6 at explosive drives, number 19 in play efficiency, 28 negative drives. That's something they could certainly improve on. More 3-and-outs, more turnovers. They were number 8 in effective rush. They were number 16 in effective pass. But to your point, and this is a tough one. They're at 92 in returning production. They've only got 52% coming back.
Kind of a problem. Yeah. Kind of a problem. Let's start with the good news, and then we'll go to the Cal football, Cal and Stanford football, the good news, and then we'll get back to the bad news here. They do return a decent amount on the defensive line.
Yeah, and the run defense is pretty good.
Yeah. So two of the 3 one of the things that we always complain about, right, are defensive tackles. Why can't Cal, the Cal fan, the one Cal fan is nodding his head right now, where it's like, yes, we need defensive tackles. They're important. They returned both James Rawls and Isaac Hodgins. They moved, one of the things that was interesting was the defensive coordinator ended up shifting a bit of the defense to more fit the personnel that they have now. So this should be a more comfortable scheme, which we saw last year. Andrew Chatfield was really pretty darn good at setting the edge. He was a Florida transfer. I think the front line's going to be good,
right,
or decent enough, right? They'll be able to hold their own.
I think they're still able to. I think that run number doesn't go far from where it's at. I think they're still able to really control the run. The worry,
so I was listening to Hifliday. This is just something to keep a lookout for. I was listening to the Quack 12 podcast, and Hifliday had hit the inside run being a problem. Where it was, they were able to set the edge. The edge guys were pretty good. The tackles were decent, but it was just if you needed yards, you could run inside. So that's something for me to keep an eye out when I'm watching Oregon State football this coming year. But overall, the numbers are pretty darn good in terms of being able to keep the run under control. The linebackers that's where things I think get hairy, because they had they had 2 really good linebackers. One is transferred to Miami and was immediately the best player on the defense.
Yeah.
And their second one was drafted in the 3rd round in the NFL. And that's awesome. Those guys weren't even on the radar last year, but they're gone. So, they bring in Easton Arnold, who was a pretty highly rated. He was the backup last year. He's a Mission High School, which is kind of a powerhouse. They train people really well. That high 3-star. So he should come in, and then things get a little hairy. They got an Illinois transfer who got hurt and then transferred to another play, and then he got hurt again and hasn't really stood up. He hasn't really been the guy. They got a 4-star linebacker from Utah. It seems like they bleed 4-star linebackers all the time, but kind of similar, Rob, to we were talking about like Illinois, or we were talking about like Alabama and some like cast-offs from the big programs. When's the last time you've seen like a 4-star Utah linebacker, and there's been a lot of them that have transferred, actually be good? Like I just feel like I don't trust that.
Yeah, there's some guys where you're like, oh, you transferred out, you like the development track that they were potentially on, but like there's some other time, like Utah transfers don't tend to pan out for some reason.
Yeah.
You're not wrong. I mean, like there's, I like what Bray. I mean, I've eaten all the crow on Bray. I like what Bray did, but I think to your point of like being able to try to find ways to put players in the best position to be successful, I think he will do that again. But I think we should expect some fall off on the backside of the back half of this defense, right? Like starting with the linebackers, that might open up the run game a little bit, right? Like for them too, because like those guys have run responsibilities directly, particularly like to Hippolyte's point inside. Yeah, I mean, you want to like, I'm a big believer that like coaching really matters. And I think that bears it out in the evidence, but I do think that like Oregon State, it is a team that is going to build a defense. And it feels like they built a defense up and got the right coordinator in place at the same time last season. Right. And now like they lost some guys to the NFL, and now they're going to have to go back and build a little bit again. Right. Like Oregon State doesn't feel like a place, at least on the defensive side, that is going to be like plug and play. Like they'll be fine. They've just recruited dudes, whatever. Like, I don't think that's the case. Like, I think these guys are going to get in, they're going to take some lumps. And then if they're seasoned again by this season, like next season might be the year to talk about this Oregon State defense. Like, yeah. To be top 10 again. Right. Like,
oh, I mean, that'd be
I think this year is a step back, right? Like, I don't think it's like, I think with the defensive coordinator that they have in place, I think with the defensive line, like, I don't think they like fall off the map. Like, I mean, I think this is like a top 25 defense, but I don't know that it's a top 10 defense again.
I don't think there's any chance that it's a top 10 defense, but some of the pieces, like, so Melvin Jordan, like, you're not going to recruit extremely well at Oregon State,
right?
But some of the areas where they had holes at the linebacking core, like Mascarenas Arnold's, Melvin Jordan, those are some of the highest recruits they brought in.
Yeah,
and now they're redshirt and freshmen and sophomores.
Yeah,
they have a couple transfers. I just think it's not going to be great, but it might not be bad,
right?
On the run defense, which is fine, because initially when I looked at this, I'm like, holy smokes, they're going to lose a ton of games. And I think that if you get an uptick on the offense and the defense takes a step back, they can still be dangerous. I don't think they compete for the title this year. I mean, we'll get to the secondary.
I mean, I think that like if some things broke their way, they're a dark horse. I don't think they're far off of some of these teams. And I think that in a lot of these games, you're going to say like Oregon State's going to come in and they'll be like less than a 7-point underdog. I mean, also like they sped up the games this season, so you're going to lose about a drive per team per game, which will make,
I forgot about that. Yeah.
Which will make the games a little tighter, right? Like, and so like a turnover here or there will matter a little more in the game's outcome. I think Oregon State is going to be in a position to be a really tough out and like nail probably at least one upset on their schedule, right? Of like somebody, because like they're not going to be that far off. The trouble is like I don't think to your point is like I don't think their ceiling this year is extremely high, right? Like I think they're going to be a really good all around team. I think the offense improves, the defense probably takes a step back. They need some things to really break their way with players. So like what we talked about, they need pass catchers to step up on offense, and they need the back half of that defense, including the secondary, to like be nails from the get-go. And I don't know that I think both of those things happening is unrealistic, right? Like, I think one of those things happening, if you're Oregon State, you are pumped, right? Like, but I think even if neither of those things happen, you're still a really good football team that probably wins 8 games, right? Like, which is fine.
That's great. Yeah, I would absolutely take that. I think the corners are the biggest question mark here. And like you're saying, where you need the pass catchers and the secondary. I think they'll be okay in the I think the safeties will be okay because they return a decent amount there. Yeah. But corner, I mean, those guys, like, and a perfect example of this is the way they handled USC. Like, that was not a fluke.
No.
That secondary was good.
Yeah.
They legit locked down those guys, and they lose a lot of them. So they're relying on JUCO transfers, redshirt freshmen that are, there's a couple high 3 stars that are there. I think they're going to have to move like their starting nickel over to corner. I just think they're kind of scraping right now for players that are going to be able to stop some really prolific offenses. So if they go 7-5 or something like that, this is why. I think it's because they can't move the ball to the wide receivers, and they can't stop wide receivers. Yeah. But everything else I think is good. And I think the good news for them is they have 2 really highly rated, like kind of 3.5-star true freshmen, bordering on 4-star guys. They're coming in this year. So I think if they see the fields, if you see Andrew Piper Jordan or I think it's Jared McCoy on the field, you should go, oh no, because that means everybody in front of them sucks.
Right.
But I think that there is a little, I can squint and see a long-term plan here. I think they've stepped up the recruiting a little bit, but yeah, like you're saying, I think this year's a drop off, and just keep a lookout for those corners because that could be a problem.
Well, I mean, they get USC off the schedule this year, so that's a plus. I mean, the game that like might, like make or, I mean, I want to say like fully make or break their season is like they get UCLA at home. Because like they get, I mean, like, they've got a decent set of like, I mean, you get San Jose State at home, then you get San Diego State at home, and then you get Washington State all before you get to Utah, right? And I'm sure they have an FCS game in there too. But then you get a little bit of a break. You get Cal, and then you get UCLA, and then you got Arizona, Colorado, Stanford, teams you're probably going to be favored against all 3, and then you get Washington and Oregon to finish the year, right? Like you definitely like, you'd like to pick up, you get Washington at home, Oregon on the road. You'd like to pick up one. I mean, like out of Utah, UCLA, and Washington and Oregon, like if they go 0-4 there, like they're probably a 7-win team because they probably drop one of the games against, one of the lesser competition along the way. But if they win one, like you might be talking about an 8-win team. That's not, and they should be good enough to maybe win one of those games.
Yeah. I'm excited. Like I think it'll be an interesting team. Clearly there is the floor is fairly high.
Yeah.
On the Beavs, and that speaks highly to what Jonathan Smith has been able to build. And I think that obviously when they play at home, they always stick, like they just pour salt in both of your eyes and kick you in the balls, and like that's how you start. And then they wheel you out to play football. So just be wary of that.
Well, and like, because I mean, like, I think too is like, I mean, beware the Beavs is spoiler, right? Because like all the top contenders play each other this season, right? So like, the Beavs could ruin somebody's shot at the Pac-12 title, particularly like Oregon or Washington late in the season. Like that's a tough out, having to go, so they'll have like, they're a team that's definitely going to have an influence on the conference race, which is fun. I mean, like it's just such a bummer. The Beavs are such a fun story. Jonathan Smith's such a fun story. He's not, I mean, like if they end up moving down, he's not going to stay, which sucks.
No, he's going to go get paid. Yeah. But hope you find a home. Yeah. Hope you guys have a good year. Enjoy the year, man. Like, ride or die.
Well, I mean, like they're the official. I mean, like truly, like everyone is pulling for the Beavs to like just like this to be their year, to be their Cinderella story.
Yeah, America's team,
truly
the
America's team.
Well, let's leave it there, Rob. I think we've gone through a decent number of teams. You want to do the LA schools?
Yeah, next? Why not?
They bring back most. They didn't dive 7,000 feet into the transfer portal, so that'll make it a little bit easier to do.
Yeah,
our previews of them.
Well, maybe
everybody.
Chip Kelly will let us know if the 5-star QB is going to be the starter.
That would be nice. That'd be nice. He's gonna be.
I know he's gonna be the starter. I mean, he started Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Like, this is happening, right? Like, he doesn't have any fear about starting a freshman quarterback.
I'm so excited about it. Like UCLA is gonna be really freaking good this year. It's like, and I'm the one that always is the opposite. I'm like, they don't have an offensive line and they don't have pass catchers. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Like I have learned my lesson, and that is one of the.
And the new defensive coordinator is probably good. They got him off the Ravens staff. So
dark horse.
I know, like UCLA is a fun dark horse that no one's talking about again. But like, I think in particular, like that, if they get defensive improvement, like, ooh, buddy.
Oh yeah, Oregon State is getting none of my money from dark horse. It's all going to UCLA.
Okay,
yeah, every penny of it.
Oh, they could. I mean, because it'll be like last year when like everybody's like, "Holy moly, Washington's good," and then like Washington just goes into Pasadena and just gets boat raced by UCLA, like on national television, and everyone was like, "Oh, all right,
yeah, oh my." Yeah. Well, we will catch everybody next week. Los Angeles schools. Hopefully, we don't have much more conference alignment, other than good news for
hopefully it's good news for everyone else.
Yeah. Thanks for tuning in.